Welcome back to another video. I'm going to be comparing the Nikon Z6I to the Z6II. Being more specific, I'm going to show you some of the most important differences with the Z6II, and I will be sharing my opinion on whether or not I think it's worth upgrading. I'll quickly mention the cosmetics. There's a slight difference to the viewfinder hump between these two models. The Z6II having a sort of beveled edge at the top of the viewfinder. Aside from a couple of millimeters extra thickness, the two are very similar, although obviously there is a difference with the memory card door. The original Z6 got quite a bit of criticism, and I think largely justified, for having a single XQD or compact flash express card slot. And for some people that's a key difference between these two, particularly in terms of backup and redundancy. I'll cover some of the key feature differences now. We do have an energy saving mode on the Z6II. 15 seconds before the standby timer engages and the screen does dim. You'll also notice that the frame rate does drop quite significantly. Once you do touch a button or hit the half shutter press, it does go back to its normal state. The viewfinder is nice and large, but some people found it a bit on the big side sometimes, particularly if you wear glasses. So they now have a smaller option in there, which just reduces the magnification a bit. There's a useful power delivery option as well with the USB, and this will power the camera mostly from a power bank if it's power delivery compliant, and it reduces the drain on the battery, and in some cases it won't drain the battery at all. This is particularly useful if you're doing time-lapse or you are using the camera for an extended period of time. And you can also still charge the battery in the camera when it's turned off. Another useful addition is the warm display color. When you engage this, it does turn the display red, depending on which mode you select. But the first one, everything goes red, including all the menus, icons, and the view. But in mode 2, it's just the icons and text, so you can decide which one of those you want. It's also possible to adjust the brightness on this. The original model would still have the eye sensor active when you pulled out the LCD monitor. So sometimes you could cut the display off by accident. This behavior has now been changed, so the eye sensor doesn't do anything at all when the LCD is pulled out. That's something I did encounter a few times, so that's been fixed. This next one is a bit of a strange one really. It just puts a white border around the display. And this includes the electronic viewfinder as well. Perhaps it helps if the image is very dark on the corners and edges. Have to be honest, it wasn't something that kept me up at night, but they did include it. But this one is very useful now. What they've done is they've added a red border around the image if you are recording. I've certainly had situations where I have forgot to press record, and this makes it very obvious if you've done that. Nikon have also adjusted the viewfinder modes. Also the eye sensor behavior seems to be a bit more logical. Sometimes it could be a bit over responsive on the original camera. When I did my review on the Z6, and I do recommend going to have a look at that, I did find that the electronic viewfinder was quite jumpy and had a fair amount of stuttering, particularly with moving subjects or if you're panning. Pleased to report that it's certainly significantly improved on the Z6II. It's a much smoother display. With the original Z6, there was no way on the back LCD to have a completely clean display. On the second version, they've added an option to program a button, so you can press that. You don't have to hold it in. You can just press it once, and that will remove all of the icons and information from the display. I'm not sure why they didn't program it to the display button, but it is there. With the autofocus, instead of the selection in the menu for the eye detect autofocus, what they've done is given you options on the control panel. So you'll see the icons there without face detect, but you'll also see human face detect or people and animals. They also added the eye detect autofocus to the wide area large. Previously, you could only use the eye detect with the auto area AF, and that was the entire frame. And there was no option to use the eye detect in video. It was just face detect, which was okay, but it was a limitation. The addition of the wide large with the eye detect is very useful because you can limit it to a smaller area. It's potentially pretty handy if you've got things like group shots where you want to home in on people, or just put the box around your main subject. There isn't a massive difference between this and the original in terms of the autofocus performance, partly because the Z6 had a lot of firmware updates, but it is a bit snappier. It also feels more consistent and stickier. There's another change which largely went unnoticed really. It was that the auto area AF performance has improved. When I did my Z6 review, I found that this was quite unreliable at times really. It could randomly focus on things on the edge or the corners. Even if something was right in front of the camera, it didn't do it all the time, but it did it enough to be annoying. Having used the Z6II for a while now, I can see that this is greatly improved over the original. It's much more likely to focus on subjects in the middle, and it doesn't seem to get confused anywhere near as much by focusing on the background. The virtual horizon has also changed. They've made it a more simplified version. It's a bit less distracting in terms of the size. Nikon increased the frame rate up to 14 frames per second from 12. It's not a huge difference, but they did increase the buffer size quite substantially. The original camera didn't have a bad buffer by any means. They've now improved that quite a lot, so if you're doing a lot of burst shooting, you will notice the difference in terms of the number of frames that you can shoot. I put some of that information on screen. There are some limitations depending on the mode that you're in. On the first camera, you could only use a battery pack. It didn't support a vertical grip. Now you have the contacts on the body, so you can use the MB-N11, but you can also use the newer MB-N14. Some of these features are quite minor really, such as the extended shutter speed. We also saw this on the D780. They've expanded some of the options for the time-lapse movie. They added a 4K 60 frames a second, although this is limited to APS-C. Some of these changes might not be particularly significant, but once you start to add them all up, the camera does feel a more rounded and polished overall experience compared to the original. Although of course the Z6 is very good value still on the used market. I tried to make a list of all of the changes that I can see, but it is possible I might have missed a few, but they should mostly be in there. Some of these options are really quite useful, perhaps a bit more than I expected. A lot of reviews when the Z6II came out said that it wasn't much of an upgrade over the original. There's a few things which did slip through the reviews though, and I didn't expect to see much difference. It was only when I started using the cameras side by side that I could see the differences, and it's not something you're going to see on a spec sheet. Obvious things such as the addition of the memory card with the SD card is of course very useful, and I do appreciate that because I have a lot of SD cards around which I couldn't use with the Z6. The EVF on the Z6II is much more natural looking in terms of the colour reproduction and contrast. It really surprised me how different it was. I can't really show that fully with a quick shot on the phone, but I have tried to. On the Z6 I found that the focus peaking was quite weak really, even with obvious subjects. It didn't really work that well, particularly when you zoomed in on something. With the speaker you can only really see a few areas with the blue, but it's much clearer on the Z6II. There isn't much difference in terms of the battery power. It's largely down to the battery which was supplied. With the Z6II it's a higher capacity version, the C-type. Do bear in mind some older third-party batteries may not work with the camera. These ones that I'm showing you here, they don't work in the Z6II, but they do work in the Z6. Otherwise you'll get this rather unpleasant nag screen which comes up and you won't be able to use the camera with those batteries. The newer cameras have actually got even worse, particularly cameras like the Z8, the Z6 III. I'm going to disagree with many of the reviewers that said that this was just a minor update and it really wasn't worth looking at if you had the original Z6. Once you add in all of those small additional updates, I think it's a better camera overall, and I do honestly prefer to use the Z6II. I think it's worth spending a bit extra whether you get one of these new, and they're still available new on the market, or used. over the original because you will probably find the user experience to be a decent improvement. As always, it's open to debate, not everyone would agree on that, but I hope you found the video useful. If you'd like to add anything yourself, if you've got any opinions, do drop a comment down below, and as usual, thanks for watching.